You know, Charles, I've got to admit,
The music's good.
I love the Terminator. This movie, Terminator, Dark, whatever, not that good. But I thought it was an excellent opportunity for us to depict, oh, whoops, I forgot to show everybody the image. Wanted to depict some of our least favorite characters as the agents of destruction. And of course, President Trump is up there in the upper right-hand corner as the one man who can rescue humanity from this psychotic, destructive force.
That's right, and they fit together like hand in glove, those lovely eye sockets. But once again, Jason, you and the art department have outdone yourselves. This is fantastic. We have a great show today. We have an international show today. We're bringing in people from over the Atlantic Ocean in the United Kingdom and as well in Scotland, which is part of the United Kingdom. And we want to rush through, I think, the beginning of the show so we can get right to them. But what we'll do is go, there quickly, just to give people a heads up for the show. After we get done talking to the great folks who started and run something called UK Column, which has been around now for quite some time, based in the UK, taking alternative journalism and media content forward into the new millennium. We're going to have some time with them, about an hour. And then after we get done talking to them, we're going to go into this whole issue of where we sit with the sword of Damocles, in our view, hovering over the Clinton Foundation, set to drop by midnight, November 15th, 2019, one way or the other. A whole bunch of donors to the Clinton frauds around the world have been getting away with mismarking their public filings and claiming donations that may or may not have actually reached the Clinton Foundation, but instead may have gone to the Clinton family and to political parties. All of that messing around, we've been exposing it now together for two plus years, waiting for Donald Trump to get through the deep state, get those people out of the IRS, out of the Justice Department, waiting for our colleagues around the world to understand that Donald Trump is here to stay and that they better get on the right side of history.
Before it's too late.
Before it's too late.
And I'll tell you, Charles, when we're done speaking to our friends from the United Kingdom, I'm calling Paramount Pictures right away, because what you've just described is so much more compelling than Terminator Dark Fate.
Right. But honestly, what we've been able to do, and with your good help, Jason, and with now a team of people all over the world looking at this, thank you for coming and joining us every Sunday, and now again on Wednesday. A team of people around the world has been quite successful laying the case out that government authorities did not want to make in the United Kingdom, in France, in Australia, multiple countries, now in multiple US states. We've made progress with investigations against facets of this foundation fraud in more than 5, close to 10 states, different ways, different places, different approaches, all of which will build now. The pressure is now all going to build as we rush forward in the next 12 total days, 10 business days, towards November 15th, 2019, which is the last date that you can submit a tax return in New York State, where the Clinton Foundation has the focus of its activities, the greatest number of people here in this state. You're actually not allowed to submit it one day past that deadline. Law doesn't allow you to do it. So one way or another, the Clintons, the donors, the lawyers, the executives, the accountants are all going to face justice shortly after November 15th, 2019, unless the world gets distracted and some dramatically untoward set of real Terminators actually come out of here for nowhere.
Perhaps some evil artificial intelligence will take over before then, but I don't think so.
Right. So if we could just quickly go into the next slide for your new subscribers and viewers. This is a different sort of approach. We're now going to open up this whole program to a new facet, bringing in these folks from UK Column. But this is an approach where we encourage our viewers to watch what we do, check what we do, look at our slides, think about our slides, check the evidence for yourselves. And then if you decide that what we have is accurate, and that it makes sense to go after these crooked foundations around the world to try to get money back from them and from the accountants and from the rich donors. If you think that makes sense, join us in reaching out. Send us constructive criticism. If you think we've made a mistake, if you like what we're doing and you want to help, contact us either on my website or through these Twitter addresses. We put UK Column. We like UK Column's approach towards Twitter handles. It's just like ours. So you just use your name, basically, and it works perfectly. People will remember it. But for the newest viewers, Jason, you might just quickly put the playlist up.
Sure.
Jason is a Hollywood veteran, and we've done now, this is our 185th two-hour show. And here, all in one place, one handy-dandy view list, you've got every one of our prior shows. You've got comments, or I think are stored on all these shows. In addition, the slides that we put out on all these shows, you can pull down, and you can see them for yourself. Jason, you might want to show one example.
Sure. And you know, it's interesting, Charles, this last Wednesday's episode of Closing In featuring John Hope Bryant has recently been tweeted right at John Hope Bryant on a tweet with not too much other activity. So I think he's going to see it. You know, it's, oh, there we go. So basically all you need to do to download the slides is in the description box under each video, there usually is a line that says download Charles' presentation, and you just click on that and it's going to bring you right to the PDF document that you can download and save on your computer to follow along, print it out. If you want to bring in multiple international Skype calls while you do it, you'll experience slow download performance like this, but there it is. And you can go through the slides and follow along.
Right, so it's all there for people who want to go and see what we've done in the past. Starting, I think our first presentation together was right after Peter Smith died in June of 2017.
Yes.
And so folks who want to learn more about the long history and evolution of what we've been trying to lay out here, you have your playlist free of charge. And I suggest that without any further ado, we jump into the next page and highlight our friends in the UK. Welcome,
Absolutely.
guys.
Thank
Gentlemen,
you.
can you hear us? There we go.
The slides come in pretty small, though.
Working on all of that. Here we go. Okay, gentlemen from the UK, welcome to the show.
Good
Delighted
evening.
to be here.
Thank you for having us.
Yes, would you guys mind introducing yourselves, perhaps? Alex?
Okay, well, I think I've been given the job to lead off. My name is Brian Gerrish. I'm one of the original founders of the UK Column. UK Column started out as a newspaper, which we produced in Plymouth in the southwest of England. We published just about 1 million copies over several years, but eventually we had to switch to internet media as not only a better way of getting information out, but also a cheaper way. And here we are in 2019, so we've been going now for about 14, 15 years.
That's fantastic. And briefly, your background before then?
My background was, I was a naval officer for 21 years with the Royal Navy, a warfare officer. My specialisation was anti-submarine warfare. And I can say that I spent quite a bit of time working with the United States Navy off the east coast of America and the Bermuda sector.
Wow.
I left the Navy in '93. I was then involved in a building surveying project management company. And then I started to wake up that things weren't right in the world.
So you're a military citizen journalist?
Absolutely, although I might have changed my views on a few things, but perhaps we'll discuss that a bit later.
Good. Who wants to go next? Alex?
That'll be David, I think.
Or David?
Okay, well, yeah, my name's David Scott. I'm broadcasting from Scotland. I'm speaking to you from just on the edge of the Highlands in Perthshire. And my role in the UK column is in part to cover things in Scotland where new ideas and often quite troubling ideas which are contrary to liberty tend to be tried out on a population which is generally quite amenable and not prone to cause too much trouble. Um, my time with the UK column probably stretches back about 4 or 5 years now, and it started with campaigning for a very fine man called Robert Greene, who sadly passed away earlier this year. And Robert Greene was a campaigner against injustice, and he was campaigning for a girl called Holly Gregg, who had been raped by a well-connected paedophile ring in Aberdeen in Scotland. Raped for many years. Holly is a Down syndrome girl, and she endured years of abuse. Robert's very courageous campaign to bring that to the public attention saw him incarcerated in prison in Scotland twice. And the second time they locked him up, it was near my home, so I started to visit him and speak to him and investigate the things that he had raised and read the reports and ask the questions of the officials. And I very quickly realised something was very wrong. And that started me off in the campaigning world, which is quite different from the day job.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you for that. How about you, Alex?
Well, I'm Alex Thompson. By background, I'm a linguist and an intelligence analyst. I was with Government Communications Headquarters, GCHQ, for 8 years, from 2001 to 2009. That's the British sister agency to the National Security Agency. And the GCHQ-NSA relationship is extremely close. It's basically a single organization for signals intelligence in very many ways, covering the Five Eyes countries, which, apart from the UK and the US, is Canada, Australia, and New Zealand. And then I emigrated to the Netherlands a decade ago, partly in despair at what was happening at GCHQ, but also to marry a very lovely Dutch lady. And about 4 years after that, 2013, so just before David Scott approached UK Column, I became one of the helpers, first of all off camera and then as a commentator as well, because I was attracted by UK Column's no-nonsense approach to investigating how much corruption, financial and other, was going on within the British government, right down to the local government level, and how much of what was blamed on the European Union, as if the evil were coming out of Brussels, was actually a domestic British problem. And since joining UK Column, I have seen that actually we can narrow down more specifically to bad actors in the City of London. Of course, there are many good people making ethical livings out of the financial industry in the City of London and around the UK, as there are in Manhattan, but there's an awful lot of shysters as well. And I think a large part of what we do at UK Column is that, and it takes us back to the military issue, because the European Union's military unification, a project which the continent makes no bones about, it's only in Britain that it's off the press and off the government agenda. That agenda very much is about creating a united tax base for the whole of Europe and creating a single supranational defense industry boondoggle conglomerate, as much as it is about creating, an army that will flatter the pride of a Macron or a Merkel. So those are the kinds of issues that I help UK Column report on.
That's excellent stuff. And most of the American viewers will not know necessarily the tough facts about Europe, that in Europe, in terms of defense spending, the UK historically has shouldered a disproportionately heavy load of that spending, and has been very active with the United States around the world, and some of the other countries you mentioned in the Five Eyes relationship have also been quite active with us, whereas for good reasons perhaps Germany has not been spending that much money, and France not that much money, and we don't need to waste a lot of time. I don't mean to disparage either of these countries talking about Italy and Spain and going down the long list. It's really the UK historically has really spent a tremendous amount of money and blood, and has also had a tremendous amount of combat experience around the world. So thank you for that.
Well, yes, this is it. We are, Brian served, I in a different capacity have served. we have a commentator not with us this evening on defence issues, not himself a veteran, but from a military family, David Ellis. Strategic Defence Initiatives is the name of his one-man brand, as it were, who lobbies members of Parliament and members of the House of Lords on this. For him in particular, it's like banging his head against a brick wall, because he is trying to bring this to the attention of British parliamentarians and increasingly Americans, senators and congressmen, together with closely allied efforts like the campaign group Veterans for Britain, who have done briefings in Washington, D.C. very recently. And it seems to be actually that senators and congressmen have taken what we are presenting more seriously than British Lords and MPs. And the more we dig, that appears to be because they are increasingly openly saying, look, the interests of what they call industry, which is basically supranational, vaguely Anglo-American defence industry, are such that we Britain, are going to have to be in this defence arrangement. That's probably why it is off the table for discussion by any of the parties, and why there is a three-line whip against discussing it.
You know, Alex, you're the first person we've spoken to who's been directly involved in GCHQ, but the second person to tell us that the relationship between GCHQ and NSA make the two agencies essentially one and the same, the other party being
Yes.
Bill Binney.
Well, Bill Binney actually left NSA in October 2001, just a few days after I had joined GCHQ. And I also sat in the same section as the GCHQ whistleblower Catherine Gun, Gun. She gets that name from her Turkish husband, who is one of our Chinese linguists, who famously went to the press, The Independent, I believe it was, in 2003, with the memo from NSA, a case in point here, Jason, sent from NSA to not just the Brits, but I believe also the other three of the Five Eyes, or at least with the relevant analysts within each of these agencies, saying we want any dirt we can get, this wasn't quite his language, but any dirt we can get on the current members of the UN Security Council so that we can swing the second vote for a war against Iraq, a vote which, of course, was never held in the end. Wow. So, yes, Mr. Binney is an absolutely grade A whistleblower, and he follows in a long tradition of signals intelligence whistleblowers who, I dare say, are a little more stable in character than some of the CIA, MI6, MI5 type whistleblowers who tend to be, because they're in human intelligence, larger than life characters. Sometimes you have to take with a pinch of salt what they say. But Bill Binney has been straight down the line in pointing out that there was a deliberate attempt at NSA in October 2001, just in the immediate wake of 9/11, to say we are not going down the track of using technology that would enable us to target specifically and with warrants those whom we have actual probable cause to suspect within our countries of wrongdoing. We are going to go the unconstitutional anti-Bill of Rights route of bulk data collection instead. And during the decade I was at GCHQ, I saw that agenda growing. And after that, of course, much of it was leaked through WikiLeaks and other undertaking, so that the public, nearly 20 years on, is well aware of this now.
So hang on there. You're suggesting that, or stating, and I think probably accurately, that in October of 2001, both of our governments believed it was possible to prosecute retaliation against Al-Qaeda or 9/11 or whoever was responsible for those various atrocities without bulk data collection, but instead chose to do that?
Well, the details of that are in many of Bill Binney's testimonies. He's spoken about it to an outfit called the International Tribunal for Natural Justice. People will find that as a video by looking for Binney, Binney, and the word ITNJ. But many other testimonies that Mr. Binney has given have said the same thing. It revolves around his proposal to the NSA senior leadership to use his technology, Thin Thread, which, as the name suggests, picks out needles in haystacks. And that is what was overturned. And as he resigned, and I was only very junior, but as I rose through, didn't rise through the ranks, because I was too difficult for that. But as I saw this beast develop through the noughties, through the 2000s, exactly what Mr. Bill Binney has said happened, which is that we were going, of course, precipitated by each of these attacks, like the 7/7 attacks in London in 2005, make of those what you will. We were told in the wake of all of these, we now need more and more bulk data collection. We need to force the telcos resident within our countries to hand over data at source, special source collection it's known as. This became the norm rather than the exception. It took some years to fully develop, to become a fully fledged domestic tyranny. But enough patriots like Bill Binney had warned around the turn of the millennium that that was the way we were going.
Wow. Well, why don't we do this, Jason? If we could go back into the slide on them, UK column, then we can help navigate through. Which would you like to cover first, Brian? We put them up in this order here of links, thinking that Jason could call up the relevant links and we could talk about each of these different topics. Do you want to go right into this GCHQ communication that you sent?
Sure, if we do that one first, then I will speak to that. And then further down the page is more general ones that David and Brian can perhaps talk about.
Okay.
But if you bring up that purported GCHQ communication snapshot, this has been around the internet several times. People will recognize it, I think.
Yep.
That's the one you turned into a PDF, Jason?
Yeah, but somehow the link is going to your local drive, so give me just a second to grab it.
All right.
Okay, well, just hang on for that. While you're finding it, I'll explain to those who don't know that a number of alternative media outlets have spoken about this apparent leak, which I am contending is a fake, but a worryingly elaborate fake. It purports to be a memo from the then GCHQ director, Robert Hannigan, dated November 2016. There we are, to the then Foreign Secretary, so the equivalent of the Secretary of State in the US, Boris Johnson, who's of course now the Prime Minister. And it purports to be Mr. Hannigan, who, by the way, resigned in an awful hurry during the Trump handover. I think, in fact, before the inauguration, if my memory doesn't fail, but certainly in January 2017. Mr. Hannigan, supposedly here, is talking about the targeting of Donald Trump. Right now, since then, we have also found out that Mr. Hannigan, and this isn't speculation, it's been confirmed. Mr. Hannigan also had a problem with having endorsed somebody while he was in his previous career at the Home Office, Britain's Interior Ministry, who turned out to be a paedophile. This happens rather a lot in the senior civil service, this kind of unfortunate blunder. But anyway, I just wanted to take 2 minutes to point out, because a lot of truthers are convinced this is genuine, that it is not. Okay, so at the very top, the classification looks plausible. Top secret strap 3, which is to named individuals only, so it's above ORCON level in American equivalent. SIGINT is short for signals intelligence, and UK eyes only. It looks plausible, but that combination of words and codes is not actually genuine. You wouldn't put SIGINT on a letter like this. There's no signals well, there are some signal intelligence details, but you normally would put a proper code word on there, not the general catch-all term SIGINT. Okay, the address looks good, the logo looks good, but the Robert Hannigan director below that is not the way that the director's name appears or his title appears on logos of letters I've seen. And this brings us to the main point. Rather than going through it exhaustively, I would just say, peppered throughout this page, there are several subtle Americanisms which most people wouldn't pick up on casual reading, but I was trained both at GCHQ and later as a translator and interpreter to look out specifically for differences between American and British English, because sometimes you have to convert one variant to the other for a different readership. And so we see, for example, in paragraph 3 here, since Folsom's start. In British English, that would be since the start of Folsom or Project Folsom. That use of the Saxon genitive is not used in Britain. Another is also in that same paragraph describing a former MI5 agent, Michael Steele. The Brits don't use that word agent in that sense. They talk about sources or officers, and MI5 in official communications is always called Security Service or BSS, British Security Service.
So,
in the following paragraph, U.S. National Security Advisor Rice, title plus last name with no first name. Again, an Americanism, but a worryingly genuine looking one, because from the reference at the top of the page downwards, the A/4 number GCHQ reference, that is a genuine format of a GCHQ reference number. Okay, I issued a report in that series myself internally with the same numbering format as that. So my contention is that some swamp creature in Washington or in one of the agencies has actually put this together in order to tar certain parties with a brush, basically, and has done a very good job of getting the truthers, running around chasing their tail, thinking, was the British deep state out to get Trump, and possibly leading people down blind alleys.
Sorry, isn't the agent, is this a different agent, Steele?
Yeah, because this says Michael Steele instead of Christopher Steele. How many people named Steele are in there? You also mentioned, Alex, this INTJ, which is an organization that's headed up by Robert David Steele. So there's a lot of questions about people with this last name Steele.
It's an interesting confluence of circumstance, isn't it?
It is.
All I can say on that is, I personally knew, and here's another discrepancy. If this memo is supposed to be talking about Christopher Steele, the famous cobbler together of the anti-Trump dossier that was picked up on by BuzzFeed and so on, if that's the man that's meant, well, not only is the first name wrong, but the agency is wrong, because he was at what's popularly known as MI6, not MI5. Official name for the MI6 agency is, of course, the the Secret Intelligence Service. And I knew Christopher Steele personally and went on trips to Washington and Langley with him. I won't blacken his name, I won't bear false witness against him, but I will say there were questions within our own section, the parts of GCHQ and MI6 covering the former Soviet Union, questions at the time when he and I were serving as to what his motivations were. He seemed inordinately interested in finding out what he could about dirt between Russian and Ukrainian oligarchs mutually, this Russian oligarch against this Russian, that Ukrainian against that Russian, and very interested in a program of getting the Ukrainian security agency, the SVR, and their Georgian equivalents and others in East Estonia and the like, to do Britain's dirty work for us. And I think if you look back to at least the early 90s, so the whole breakup of the Soviet Union and onwards, that seems to have been a particular British specialty within the MI6 Russia desk, or certain key individuals within them. I won't say that they're all bad by any means, but they all seem to have been focusing on using Russia's neighbouring and hostile countries, which want to join the EU and NATO, to come up with a whole load of hogwash, or possibly half-truths, even worse, about the links between oligarchs in those countries and political factions in Britain and Washington.
Well, and that's been very fertile ground in our broadcast. We've been talking about how people need to understand Bill Clinton was president just as the Soviet Union imploded, and had unholy relationships with various donors, including Mark Rich and George Soros and others who were exploiting the former Soviet Union and Central Europe. So that when we start thinking about the potential Russian connection and Ukrainian influences in 2015 and 2016, we need to remember that this saga goes way, way back, probably well before Bill Clinton was president. We need to explore, how did Bill Clinton get his first early education in foreign affairs, literally, in the UK, starting at Oxford? What was the role of Strobe Talbot? What is the role of Strobe Talbot, another Rhodes Scholar, and the many Rhodes Scholars that Bill kept up with over time? And don't just pick this up in 2015 and 16 as a Christopher Steele story, or in 2016 as a Crossfire Hurricane and Ukraine story. This is a story that has made people billions, tens of billions of dollars over time. It's a story that I think involves our security services officially and unofficially, and yours officially and unofficially, maybe in certain instances thinking they were doing good works, but in too many instances allowing rogue operators to get their hands very dirty and use proceeds of the dirty hands to finance political activities and personal lifestyles around the world. It's a deep story, I think.
This is, you've summarized it very well there, Charles. A number of extremely good patriots in all the British and all the American agencies, and certainly the Canadians as well, have spent their whole careers looking at the former Soviet Union or some subsections of Russia as a valid threat to our national security. Some of them have become enlightened to what you just sketched out while serving. A lot more of them, like Brian, a retired Navy officer, have done so after coming ashore or resigning their commission and thinking harder about what was going on. But the nub of it is actually what you just identified. The particular problem with Russia and Ukraine is their oligarchic politics. For his faults, Mr. Putin has cleared that up, booted out some of the worst players where they were welcomed with open arms by MI6 and MI5 officers. Again, not the whole agencies, but certain handlers within them. Placed in nice mansions just outside London, where some of them then died mysterious deaths under our noses. While just before I left GCHQ, I saw this wave of deaths going on. That agenda, I think some of the older officers were wise to it at GCHQ and NSA, but I saw a lot of them kind of harumphing, and one or two who said to me, well, young man, we're married and we've got mortgages to pay, so we will serve out our time quietly, thank you very much. But I heard mutterings about not so much Strobe Talbot and the Democrat side, but certainly on the Republican side, one or two of the really deep Georgia and Ukraine experts took me into a corner in London sometimes and said things like, Richard Pearl, look at his work, he's an eminence grise. And of course, Talbot is an equivalent for the Democrats. Incidentally, I spoke to Clinton's fellow student from the Georgetown period. And this fellow student was pleased to tell me that he, the fellow student, got a B in Carroll Quigley's classes. And very few people ever did, and certainly none got an A. And he said that Bill only scraped a D because he was spending too much time chasing French skirt at Georgetown. So Bill is not the political genius behind this agenda. He's allowed himself to be used by others.
What was the name of that book? You know, Carroll Quigley has come up a few times. I need to read. There's a book. What's the Anglo-American Establishment or something like that?
The one that he wrote first and could not get published until posthumously is called The Anglo-American Establishment. It was published around 1980-81 and is available as a PDF. And the slightly more anodyne and longer one is called Tragedy and Hope, A History of the World in Our Time. It's Carroll with 2 R's and 2 L's because it's a man's name. And that one is very hard to digest for most people, but an extremely good summary of it is one called The Naked Capitalist, which is the partner volume to one called The Naked Communist. And that was written by W. Cleon Skousen in the 1960s.
Right.
And if I'm not mistaken, Tragedy and Hope is Quigley's most famous work. There's also an independent media group that's taken that name who created a film about Bill Binney. And I know we want to get to our other guests, but just real quickly, Alex, you mentioned a string of deaths that you noticed at GCHQ. It causes me to ask you about Gareth Williams, because if we're talking about deaths at GCHQ and stuff having to do with Bill Clinton, what I've read is that this guy was an MI6 agent who was working with GCHQ and had discovered Bill Clinton's diary or his calendar or something like that. Did you work with Gareth Williams? Can you speak to this matter at all?
I knew him to greet as I walked around GCHQ, and it was actually the other way around, to be technical, Jason. He was a GCHQ officer who was on secondment to MI6 in London at the time of his death.
Thank you.
And in contrast to the other whistleblowers and deaths that we had in my time, there was nothing at all said about him. It was almost as if an internal silence notice had been put on the poor man's death. I know that his family up in Anglesey in North Wales never believed this nonsense about him being a sexual pervert. And he is one of at least 14 unexplained deaths of Brits and foreigners in London, which has been written about by several people, including by BuzzFeed, which is usually trash, but the particular reporter who did that series, Heidi Blake, I think her name is, wrote a good series. I have to tread carefully here because there's disinformation on every side, and I know more of the people who are, like the widows of the people who died, but what I will say is the general line is the only thing that united these people is that they knew more than they should about a dark agenda within a select few at MI6 and MI5 to misuse, misrepresent, miscast the flows of money in Eastern Europe. And I think I ought to hand over to Brian on this. He's keen to come in, and it's probably regarding the question of financing of the major British political parties by some of these oligarchs.
Please.
Alex, thank you for that. It's funny because my mind was going through a lot of subjects while you were talking, but a little while ago I was part of a group giving a talk up in London, and as part of my presentation I brought up the subject that British newspapers a little while ago were happily publishing the close relationship between our Prime Minister Boris Johnson and a gentleman called Alexander Temerko, who they described as forging a career at the top of the Russian arms industry and also being at the highest level of the Kremlin. And the papers are showing a picture of Boris Johnson with his arm around this Russian gentleman. And what is very interesting is what the Russians said. I'll read a little bit off screen. It says that Temerko spoke warmly about his friend Johnson, telling how the two men sometimes call each other Sasha, the Russian diminutive for Alexander, which is Johnson's real first name. He described how at the beginning of Johnson's tenure as Foreign Secretary from 2016 to 2018, they would often plot late into the evening over a bottle of wine on the balcony of Johnson's office at Parliament in Westminster. And it also goes on to say that Temerko predicted that if there was trouble to do with the United Kingdom leaving the European Union, that Boris Johnson's political position would be elevated to become a leader. So we've got this bizarre situation at the moment where it is openly acknowledged that the British Conservative Party has taken hundreds of thousands of pounds from Russian oligarchs, which the party does not want to give back. David Cameron did not want to give that money back, and Theresa May, as Prime Minister, certainly didn't want to give that money back. And we can see from further press reports very close relationship between the now British Prime Minister and Russians who were apparently working at high level to the Kremlin. So something is very strange at the moment, because the British public are being told on almost an hour-by-hour basis that Russia presents a present and growing military threat, not only to the UK, but to Europe and the world. And on the other hand, we've got a Conservative Party in power taking money from Russian oligarchs. And this is where I think it brings us full circle to some of Alex's analysis, where we have to say these people that Putin was removing from Russia have certainly now taken residence in London, in UK, and they seem to be frighteningly close to the people in political power.
Oligarchs and unregulated globalism. It's just, you guys have the same problem that we have right here in the United States.
Well, I think we can add to it, because when you step back and you look what's happening, what I think we are seeing very clearly in the United Kingdom is we no longer have a democratic government in office. David Scott, who's with me tonight, has described it as a government of occupation. And I think this is a particularly good description, because when we start to look at individual members of parliament, when we start to look at the political parties, we start to see this immense corporatist moneyed power base that is clearly controlling these individuals. And I found it fascinating that at the beginning of your show tonight, you were talking about foundations and the power of foundations next to government. We're also seeing this in UK, but we're also seeing immense power with non-government organisations and indeed charities, who you would expect to just be looking after the little man on the street or the homeless man on the street. But what we see is very powerful charities deeply embedded in politics. And one of the key ones of these charities, which caught my interest a few years ago, and I've done a lot of research work, is called Common Purpose. And it is amazing to find that this charity is now working right the way across our political and public sector areas. And we've even got it in the military, and indeed we even had it operating in GCHQ, which aroused Alex's interest. So we certainly are no longer seeing a simple political system where people are elected to represent us and they do a job. What we are seeing is people heavily connected to immense financial power, immense corporatist power.
Totally agree. And what is your colleague's perspective on that in Scotland?
Over to David, I suppose.
If I could come in at that point, Brian mentioned what we term the government of occupation. Let's start there. This came out of campaigning within Scotland for people who were being targeted by the state and who were being treated with tremendous injustice, and to try and get the victims of this and those trying to help to appreciate that the normal human reaction by people who believe in their country and believe in their justice system and believe in the police force, the way we were probably all brought up, is entirely counterproductive. Because what they do is they appeal to the authorities to have the injustice corrected. And when the injustice is not corrected, they then appeal higher up in the authorities and they launch complaints. And then when that doesn't go well, they appeal yet higher up. So after 2 years of this, they end up with a huge folder of paperwork, appealing everywhere up to and including the Prime Minister, and getting precisely nowhere. And the first thing we have to explain to them is this isn't helping, because you're assuming that this organisation is actually there to represent your interests and to deliver some form of justice. This isn't the right model. Stop thinking of it as a government and start thinking of it as an occupying power. If you were occupied, how would you interact with this government? And that actually makes a lot more sense. People start approaching the problem with a great deal of caution. And when they are interacting with the state, they're considering very carefully the pros and cons of doing so before they take that step. It makes them much safer. So we started to introduce this idea. It was born out of experience, very harsh experience, campaigning for people like Holly Gregg and Robert Greene and many others within Scotland. One of the things that we've seen in the UK, Scotland in particular, but all around the UK, is huge changes in government come in, huge changes in policy. There is no debate. They are brought in by stealth, and they are brought in to completely change how things operate. One of these was a thing called the Scottish model of government. And the Scottish model of government was introduced by a civil servant, an English civil servant, the head of the Scottish civil servants, called Sir John Elvidge, who was a common purpose. Brian mentioned common purpose. Sir John Elvidge was a very high-ranking person within the Common Purpose organisation. And when in 2007 the Scottish National Party quite unexpectedly found themselves in government, he approached them and said, look, they were looking for a big idea. They wanted to show that they could make progress and they could be a fresh, new force in government to encourage further support. So they wanted some big ideas, but they really didn't have any. And so John Elvidge offered them this idea of the Scottish model of government. Now, what that is the government joined up to the ultimate degree. There are no functional departments anymore. So when you contact any aspect of the government, you contact the whole of the government. So if you contact housing, then information can flow from there to social services, to police, to child protection services, to anywhere. So information flow becomes key. This means that all checks and balances are removed, because the police is part of this as well. The police in Scotland is now a unified police force. There's only one police force. The police has become part of this extended idea of government. So when you approach the police to investigate some other aspect of the state, well, good luck with that, but it's not going to happen. Now, this developed and was then starting to be sold around the world. So John Elvidge went to Hong Kong to sell the idea of the Scottish model of government to the Hong Kong government, interestingly enough. And on it developed. And it went for years before the Scottish people knew anything about it. It was done completely under the radar, and it was a complete root and branch transformation of how government operates, and no one said anything. They then went forward with a scheme called the named person scheme, which is the last word in totalitarianism. What it did is to assign a state guardian to every child in the country. Ooh. To be a kind of third parent. When they were explaining this idea to a children's parliament, and to use quite simple language, they said all of the children are like delicate plants, and all of the adults in their lives are like gardeners who tend and care for them. But the named person, the state official, that's the head gardener. So they were putting this official in charge of the family.
Ooh.
This role was to gather information on the child and on every associated adult from all sources. Whenever the named person, whenever the state official felt the need to do so, essentially for any reason. And they went for 5 years and trained people to do this. Now, when this got out, there was a huge public outcry against this interference in the family. And it went through the Scottish courts and lost at every step. And it eventually went to the Supreme Court in London and was ruled utterly unlawful. And at least nominally in legal terms, the whole scheme has been scrapped. But of course, the training remains, and a lot of the data sharing remains, and a lot of the attitudes remain. But it shows you the degree to which the changes were brought in with no one being told. And we have that on record. We have the minutes of the meetings, which decided they were not going to tell families, they were not going to tell parents, they were not going to tell the Scottish people until everything was embedded within the professions and everything was working. It was brought in secret, intentionally. So with these things going on, what you think your government is no longer true. And that's why we treat it as a government of occupation, because that approach, Moscow rules you might call it if you know Le Carre, that approach is the only safe way to proceed.
Wow, you gentlemen are doing very important work, and that's a scary summary of what's going on in Scotland and in the UK. We have about, I'd say, another 20 minutes or so. I don't know how much time you would have, but it would be very helpful, I think, for our viewers to get a sense from you who are so stuck in on the ground, what's going to happen in this coming election here? What should we be assuming are the reasonable scenarios to consider between now and I guess it's December 12th for the election in Britain?
Are you going, Alex? Go ahead.
I will. Okay. Well, if our other colleague David Ellis had been able to be here this evening, he would have been very keen to talk about this. So I'm glad that I'll be able to fill in for him. To cut to the chase, I know that in the comments in the chat, a lot of people are saying, what do they think about Brexit? What's the general election? There is no Brexit of any meaning. Right, so let's address that first. It's Brexit without the exit. It's been known as, and for an American and other overseas audience that doesn't follow the intricacies, the basic reason for that is that none of the parties will talk about defence and defence spending. Okay, so it's not just the Ministry of Defence or the armed services; it's the huge amounts, the billions that go into the tax pot that is not up for discussion, even though other controversial issues are just about nudging onto the horizon, like is fishing part of the Brexit deal? Is foreign policy affected? Nevertheless, the Brexit Party, despite its name, will not even talk about this defence and defence union. That's the proper name for the EU policy, this defence union aspect, because there's a whole alphabet soup of sub-components of it. People can read all about them by going to ukcolumn.org/defence, spelt the British way with a CE at the end. And if you look below the timeline at the articles, you'll see a lot of detail there. But the Brexit Party won't talk about this at all, and won't even tell us at this point, tell the public, who their defence spokesman is. Now, this brings me to the more immediate question of the general election, scheduled for the couple of weeks before Christmas now. Because of this timing of the Brexit referendum implementation, this general election, of course, is going to be heavily dominated by questions of what kind of Brexit are we going to get and when and how full will it be. But the real problem there is that the Brexit Party and the Conservative Party, despite both advocating either no-deal Brexit or a substantial Brexit, won't talk about that aspect and the fact that we have already signed ourselves up to these components. And again, it's a financial complication and involvement we've got ourselves into, and where it interests a man who's worked in money like yourself, Charles, is that it basically gives Manhattan and the City of London jurisdiction not only over the United States and the United Kingdom, as they seem to have basically enjoyed since the Second World War, with figures like W. Averill Harriman really being one of the initiators of this plan, but it basically gives that unidentifiable nationality blob of capital, a leveraged capital, access to the European continent. Okay, so it's a multifaceted beast, but the election is going to be all kinds of claim and counterclaim about anything that doesn't matter in the election, and there will not be anything said if the press and the whips of the mainline parties can help it. There'll be nothing said about EU military unification, and I would have some comments about the security apparatus as well, but I think I ought to let Brian come in for a few minutes first. You're muted, I think, Brian.
I hope you can hear me okay.
Now we can, yes.
It's extremely heavy rain has just started, and I can hear it on my roof, so I hope that won't come through on the microphone.
We don't hear it.
But I'll just reinforce what Alex has said. The key bit, which people in UK, a lot of people in UK just do not understand this. They're not being told about it. But as the British government was talking about Brexit, as discussions with were carrying on with David Cameron or Theresa May, what was happening in the background is that British military was being signed deeper and deeper into EU defence union. This is not an EU army. This is everything. This is Army, Navy, Air Force. It is defence industries, it's procurement, it's intelligence services. All of this is being brought into one system in the European Union, that is EU Defence Union, and it's going to be under single point control. None of the mainstream press are talking about this, but that is what is taking place. And so when we hear people in UK, politicians talking about Brexit, what they're not telling the public is we may declare Brexit, but actually all of that military commitment will carry on as if nothing had happened. And where is that military commitment going in the European Union? Well, senior members of the European Union have said publicly that they are building an empire, and to build that empire, they must have a completely unified military system, and that must include nuclear weapons. And this is why that there has been such a deep and prolonged effort for Britain to start committing its nuclear capability to the European Union, and they are doing that by teaming the UK up with the French, and of course the French hold their own nuclear weapons. But the aim is that ultimately the European Union will become a nuclear power. People in UK simply not being given this information by the mainstream press. This is all secret, it's all in the shadows. But the other thing going with it, and particularly, I'm not sure whether it was you, Charles, but somebody just now sort of said about the amount that the UK is putting in with regard to military budget. Well, it's true that we're meeting our 2% commitment, but the reality is that UK's armed forces have been slaughtered. They have been decimated by planned cuts in order to reduce the size and capability of UK's armed forces to parity with other countries in the European Union to assist EU Defence Union. And if I take the Navy, I can speak with some confidence about that. That was my old career. At the moment, you hear a lot being said about Britain's 2 new aircraft carriers. Well, the Queen Elizabeth is at sea. It still has about 6 F-35s. It's nowhere near having a full air wing on board. But worse than that, the Royal Navy is unable to get escorts to sea in any numbers to protect that aircraft carrier. We're unable to get submarines to sea. The reality is that Britain's armed forces, compared, if I go back to the mid-1980s, we have barely got what are we talking about? We've barely got 20% of the naval facilities operating. And this is not being talked about. You don't hear it talked about in relation to NATO commitment, nor indeed to the EU commitment. But I'll bring people's attention back. Why were these cuts made? because Britain was too powerful militarily and therefore dominated the European system, we had to be reduced to parity, particularly with the French in a naval sense, and with the other European Union levels for, say, the Army or the Air Force. And I'll just leave the comment with the fact that at the moment, German military capability is in a pitiful state, absolutely pitiful. So right the way across the European Union, national forces decimated because they needed to be able to build this thing together into one EU perspective. And I'll end by saying that at the Liberal Democrat conference, which was about a month ago, one of the powerful and very outspoken European Union politicians, a gentleman called Guy Verhofstadt, said on the stage of what is supposed to be Britain's most liberal party, he said that basically the future was about empires and nation states were past. There would be no more nation states. So a European politician standing on a liberal political platform in UK, calmly telling the audience that their country was going to be dismantled in order to create a European military empire.
If I could chip in for just 1 minute on
Sure.
who's responsible, and perhaps full circle this back to Russian money or oligarchic money again, there's two categories, I think, of people who are pushing this within the cadre that matters, which is the British civil service, okay? Because we know from recent disclosures, although we already knew before, ministers don't set policy in the British system. Anyone who's watched the classic comedy, Yes, Minister, Yes, Prime Minister, will know that it's the senior civil servants, okay? So the senior civil service is one aspect of this. We've had a National Security Council introduced in the US model to Britain in the last few years, and all four directors of that national security apparatus since it was created have been former Foreign Office men who in their previous careers actively pushed Franco-British military alliances, EU integration and the like. That is the Prime Minister's ear, the direct access past the ministry straight to Downing Street has been cornered by these former Foreign Office hyper-integrationists. We've reported some with names and faces on our series on defence unification of Europe. And the other is perhaps at the party funding level. And perhaps Jason will have a moment just to go back to that slide we had and pull up the link from the middle of the page called Lively Comments on Looming UK Election. That is a tweet by Aaron Banks, the string puller of the Brexit party in many ways. And here he is sarcastically replying to my mind, a very decent former member of the European Parliament who was advocating a real Brexit, a lady called Suzanne Evans. Suzanne Evans is accusing the Brexit party of attempting to split the Brexit vote because of Britain's first past the post geographical district based electoral system, so that if you vote, if the vote is split, then the other side will get in that constituency. And basically she's saying this way, a lot more Marxist MPs will be returned to Westminster and perhaps form the majority. So Suzanne Evans is making that point, and Aaron Banks is sarcastically replying, you know nothing about political strategy. And then below that, people have said, actually, what are you, Mr. Banks? What is the Brexit Party? And we wouldn't restrict this just to the Brexit Party. What is the Conservative Party? To some degree, even what are parts of UKIP? Have they actually been captured by a group which this Mr. Banks himself proudly proclaims himself as belonging to in his Twitter profile, which is the bad boys of Brexit? We have left-wing journalists like Carol Cadwallader writing for The Observer and The Guardian, Britain's equivalent of the Wall Street Journal and the New York Times. Carol Cadwallader has correctly identified a lot of the problem with this bad boys of Brexit setup, that it's dirty money coming into British politics and pulling the electorate away, and false pretenses of Brexit. But sadly, because she is in this mold of Trump bad, she can't actually identify the source of the problem here. But I think we're getting a little closer to seeing that party funding and the British security state, just like the equivalent problems in the US that you have with both party funding and the national security state, are part of the issue here, and that both of these groups of people are posing as patriots when they're quite the opposite.
Well, but just to
Can
go
I
back,
just add to that?
go ahead.
Sorry, can I just add to that, Alex, that the website is actually badboysofbrexit.com. If you go there, there is some phenomenal analysis on that website. But of course, you'll see in the opening picture that they are there aside President Trump. I will just add the man that interests me very much is Nigel Farage, because if we look at his activities in simple terms, he led UKIP to the point where 17.4 million people voted to leave the European Union. He then abandoned the party, saying that he had to leave UKIP and he was leaving politics. But he then turned up on the stage next to President Trump, so he got involved in in American politics. And then the next thing we see is that Nigel Farage is heavily involved in the Brexit Party, and that has left the old UKIP, United Kingdom Independent Party, to fall into a ruinous state. And it's my personal feeling that Nigel Farage has been a Pied Piper. He's been there to wave a banner to draw people who wanted to leave Europe to him. But what he's then done is led them into a cul-de-sac. But I'm happy to discuss that maybe another time. But this website, if people go onto this website and look at the detail about the background of these individuals, it's a tremendous amount of work. And because it's been put together by a member of Parliament, they were obviously very careful, because virtually every paragraph is full of what would be libelous material if it were not true.
But just to return though, if I just jump in for a second, back to the question though, December 12th, 2019, what do we think is going to be the outcome of this general election? Which party is going to end up winning? Or is it going to be a three-way?
To say at the moment we are going to get a Labour, Liberal Democrat, Scottish National Party coalition, a continental European-style coalition, pipping the Conservatives and Brexit at the post. This is what the accusations are about right now. And behind, as I know you're interested in what this means for not just Europe, but China. And I'll just throw in quickly here that one of the factions in the British civil service, which again runs the country, the politicians don't, the faction under what we now call the uncrowned king of the British civil service, Sir Mark Sedwill, is openly pro-Chinese communists to such an extent that for many years now, with a big increasing paper trail behind it, he and his people have pushed the integration of the Five Eyes signals intelligence agencies with Huawei equipment, software and hardware.
That's not
kicking and screaming all the way. So that's a major worry. There are factions against that, more patriotic guys like Sir Richard Dearlove, a retired head of MI6, who are kicking up a stink about that in turn. But that seems to be the deep state has set a course for Eurasian integration, copying the Chinese social control model, regionalization of the world into blocks. And this will only be assisted if the Marxist parties get into the ascendancy. But even if the Conservatives do limp home on the 12th of December, we're going to have the same long-term issues of secret supporters of EU integration.
And gentlemen, our commenters are remarking that this sounds parallel to what's going on in the United States.
Yeah, I mean, it's really disheartening. We think about, I haven't been back to London since 2012, but just reading press accounts of your mayor, our mayor it's tough to say who's worse, but we have here the two great cities, big cities in each of our countries that are financially attuned, are controlled at this moment by, certainly not here in New York, by communists. I mean, these people are steadily taking apart this city, brick by brick. On the way up to Jason, I haven't even told him, I'll tell him live on air, there's another big store that's gone out on 6th Avenue there.
Which one?
Not just south of 23rd Street, another big one.
Big Best Buy?
Not Best Buy, sorry, on 7th Avenue. Just next to the subway.
I'll have to
Anyway,
check.
but there's store after store is closing down in
retail.
this city. Business confidence there is no business confidence. People are fleeing like crazy. I gather there's a certain amount of that in London. And sadly, I'll just say as an investor, if you are right which I fear you are right about what could happen on the 12th, we're going to see severe downward correction in the UK stock market and in the European stock markets. And I think
that sounds like something for David to pick up on. David Scott is very keen on following economics and finance.
Please.
Well, there's a couple of things I'd like to throw in just at the moment. On the election in the UK, we've had a very strange situation for quite some time where Parliament has been essentially immobilised. Parliament is clearly acting against the wishes of the people, clearly acting against the interests of the country, clearly acting against the people.
That sounds familiar.
And it's caused complete gridlock. Now, one of the things that tends to happen before totalitarianism is you tend to get democracies breaking down to become ineffective. So one of the things, and we're seeing this all across Europe, we're seeing parliaments becoming less and less able to do anything and becoming more and more split. Israel's about to have its third election because it cannot reach a decision, right? There is no move forward.
Excuse me for interjecting, David. Excuse me, but your comment coincides with a commenter asking about the closing of Israeli embassies. Is that at all related to what you're bringing up?
I don't know. I'm sorry. I can't speak to that. That's quite surprising if that's happening. I'll need to look into that.
Sure.
So I think one of the things that we could see is a further logjam and more public discontent with the parliamentary system. It's already in considerable disrepute. The other thing I'd like to talk about, Brian covered very well the state of the UK military and the state of the German military. And I see there's many aspects of the American military, large as it is, that's in equally shambolic condition. But we're seeing something now talked about through think tanks in Europe that look forward to the European military union once it's fully established. And what they're seeing is a vast financial investment, clearly a huge rearming, but rearming on a collective basis. They're seeing the financial muscle that's involved in that being so enormous as to compel involvement from countries like the United Kingdom and Norway, which are not part of the EU. And they're seeing this as going to a point where NATO ceases to be what it is now, but becomes a bilateral alliance between the US and the EU. And we're also seeing NATO, which, let's remember, is based in Brussels. Day to day, it sounds more and more like the EU. And although America's the largest contributor by far, the people who set the policy seem to be the people in Brussels and the people in Berlin. That's what's driving the NATO policy. And one final thing about the concept of empire, right? People can go and search for a couple of terms and they'll find the maps that the EU are generating. One term is the Eastern Partnership. And this shows all the countries that they're looking to bring into the EU: Moldova, Georgia, the Ukraine, Belarus, Azerbaijan, even. Right. So this is well advanced discussions. The Prime Minister of Great Britain, the former Prime Minister of Great Britain, Theresa May, went to a meeting in 2017 to talk to the Eastern Neighbourhood partner countries, the Ukraine and others. And she said, just quote here, there's a huge amount of potential in the Eastern neighbourhood we should nurture, but we must also be open-eyed to the actions of hostile states like Russia, which threaten this potential and attempt to tear our collective strength apart. This summit highlights the crucial importance of the European countries working together to protect our shared values and ideals. The UK may be leaving the EU, but we are not leaving Europe. We are unconditionally committed to maintaining Europe's security. And that was directed at the Ukraine. So you can see how aggressive that is towards the east and towards Russia. And the other one is the southern neighborhood, which is the whole of North Africa from Morocco right the way across to the Levant, includes Syria, includes Israel, includes Lebanon. So when you see this map complete, it looks like the Roman Empire plus a bit. It looks like an empire.
Amazing stuff. Well, we're nearing a full hour with you guys, and it's getting late over there in the UK, and so we don't want to keep you too much longer. I think if it's all right with you gentlemen, maybe in a number of weeks we could have another session like this where we talk an update on the general election, but in addition, switch the focus a little bit to contrast the animus that the deep state seems to have against Russia with the love affair that it seems to have with China, which to me does not make any sense whatsoever from a United States perspective, particularly from a European perspective. It just doesn't make sense that we would, as freedom-loving peoples, relatively small individual nations, each of us, rush into the embrace of a country that is persecuting Muslims, perhaps trading in human organs, has these diabolical, aggressive moves, both in cyberspace, in technology, in military around the world. We love that, but we're going to look at Russia and say, much weaker economy, a much smaller country, we're going to say, no. These are our enemies, Russia. China are our friends. So perhaps we could have a follow-on session in, 3-4 weeks or so, where we catch up with you all about the election and also go into that contrast if that suits you.
That sounds a wonderful idea, Charles.
Great.
Would be good.
Well, thank you all. Thank you, the three of you, so much for your time on a weekend, on a Sunday. Thanks for the great work that you do. I know our Jason's extended subscriber base is going to take a keen interest, I think, in going to the UK column and looking at the great content that you put out recently and have done historically. And Alex, thank you for being the spearhead to get this thing together, and a pleasure to meet each of you new gentlemen as well. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Good evening.
Thank you very much.
Take care, gentlemen. And I've certainly got quite a bit of interest in hearing more about Gareth Williams and other topics, so hopefully we'll be speaking to you a lot more in the future.
So we'll let you sign off.
Okay.
And with that, we'll say cheerio to our guests in the UK, Charles. That was an amazing panel. Lots of great feedback coming from our live chat there during the conversation. And I'll tell you, that worked really well, given the technological challenges of connecting people from around the world.
Great. Well, we sort of assumed, you and I assumed and talked that this might stretch a little bit longer than we thought. We have a lot of material to cover, but I think I could bring it in at around 2 hours total if we fly into the slides.
Well, Charles, there's no restrictions on you. This is like Charles Unleashed.
All right. Well, with that said, I'm very impressed with the UK column. I know Alex better than the other two gentlemen and the guy who couldn't make it. Thank you for reminding me. That's much better.
I was just noticing that your level was super high.
Right. So I really would encourage people to get smart on UK column and the topics they cover, and let's watch what's going on. We've brought reports from Sweden of change in the wrong direction. It sure seems to me, based on what I just heard, that the UK looks to be another big short from a financial standpoint, and as does much of Europe, frankly.
Yeah. A lot of interesting questions for those guys.
Yeah. So maybe if we could jump into the next slide. There is I don't know who these people are at Conservative Treehouse, but I am so impressed. Their latest story I saw this morning, and I actually wasn't able to read it all in detail because when you pull it up, there's a tremendous amount of detail in here, but whoever does this work came out today, or posted today, this Sundance person, has gone into the timeline of what was going on as Trump took power and then as Mueller got, in quotes, tapped to head up his investigation, and is finding disturbing overlap of carryovers from the Obama administration, still in justice or then still in justice, disturbing duplicity, which we'd called out Mr. Rat Rodenstein a long time ago. But here's somebody who somehow manages to get, he's gotten into the FISA application file.
Wow.
He's got information on meeting specific times, when they were happening. This is in 17. This person, they cite Tash Gahar, I'm probably slaughtering her name, has just left the Justice Department. She, however, was in the Attorney General's office at the time of, in the Obama administration, and then in the early period in the Trump administration. And so this is a lengthy piece that the headline takeaway is the rot at justice is a lot deeper than people believe. That the Obama administration and before it, even and perhaps especially the W. Bush administration, and before that the Clinton administration, have had an opportunity to get into the highest levels of these various agencies and departments, cabinet level departments, put people in who are all in for unregulated globalism, are all against U.S. nationalism, and are all for having their partners and their friends engage in self-promotion activities, whether it be advancing political interests or advancing personal romantic interests, as we see with the throuple, Lisa Page and McCabe and whoever else it was.
That hasn't been confirmed. I think the only throuple was the pot-smoking congresswoman who resigned.
Oh, okay. Well, I'll just take the bet that in Washington, D.C., there are a lot of thruples. I'll take that bet.
Yeah.
Anyway, but this is a long piece for people to read, and it's actually a cautionary tale that we're up against, at least in the general project of understanding what the hell was going on when Barack Obama was working with Hillary Clinton to make sure that she succeeded him. But here's the memo. If we stop, this is dated Tuesday, May 16th, the day before Mueller was, I think, came on board. Didn't he come on board on the 17th?
I don't know. The most memorable aspect of Robert Mueller's investigation was the outcome, which was nothing.
Yeah. So, and I guess this was declassified on June 21st, 2019. So somehow the folks at Sundance, rather, Conservative Treehouse, are able not only to quickly gain access to this information, but also to make sense of it. And another page that I read almost not quite as much as Zero Hedge is this Conservative Treehouse. They do fantastic work.
I think Dr. Corsi is a big fan of Conservative Treehouse as well.
Right.
So that's a good resource for people to find information.
All right. So, this story here, the next one, we're going to take each of these links, but quickly. All right. Senator Ron Johnson is one of my personal heroes, actually, in Washington, D.C. Here's a guy who was a business person. I believe from memory he had a problem with a health emergency with one of his children, which caused him to think more deeply about the way in which government interacted in the healthcare area, and that led him into running for Senate ultimately and serving in Washington, where he's a fair-minded, tough guy. He's the one who was asking Hillary Clinton tough questions at the Benghazi Senate hearing, and she responded to him, at this point, what difference does it make? Right. He was the one who asked those questions.
That's awesome.
And he was the one who most recently was on with that ferret who does Meet the Press. What's that guy's name?
Wallace?
No, that's Fox. The guy, who's the junkie on Meet the Press.
Oh, I don't know.
Well, anyway, the name will come to me. But he was really rude to Ron Johnson. We covered it a couple of weeks ago. He tried to make it seem that Johnson was being outrageous and selling conspiracy theories, when in fact what he was trying to do is to get to the bottom of what really did happen in the 2015, 16, and afterwards election cycle and resistance cycle. What was going on? So Johnson has done us all a great service recently. I mean, he continually does so, but recently what he's done is request or demand from the National Archives all of the Barack Obama, Hillary Clinton emails, of which I think they're probably going to turn out to be a lot more than the ones that we even know about. There may be text messages, there may be other ways that the two were communicating. Remember, Hillary joked about using, Snapchat or something like that?
Yeah.
Right? I don't know that she was using Snapchat with Barack Obama, but as a guess, we're going to discover that the decision, this has been a central thesis of ours all along, that the decision to allow the toilet bowl server system and these unvetted electronic devices was not taken by Valerie Jarrett alone. Barack Obama knew about it, and Barack Obama probably emulated it,
Right.
as may have Valerie Jarrett, as may have people like Eric Holder and others.
2 quick points. This guy, Ron Johnson, looks a little bit like Ted, who owns CNN?
Ted Turner.
Yeah. And also the joke about Snapchat, Charles, for our viewers who are not technologically savvy or don't have teenagers.
And for me.
And for you, Snapchat's hook is that you send a message and it lasts for, only a limited amount of time, or you read it once and it disappears or something like that. So Hillary Clinton might have been joking and trying to seem relatable to a younger generation, but that also might be a way that people who are familiar with criminal proceedings and don't want things to get discovered in discovery might communicate.
Exactly. What is it? Yeah, that's Snapchat. I think I'll do that right away. So Andrew McCarthy, does great work. He's a former second in command to the U.S. Attorney in the Southern District of New York. He writes for the National Review. Here's a piece from January 23rd, 2018. Again, going into this idea that the reason Hillary was not indicted or actually investigated is because the folks in Justice, the folks at the FBI knew that there was a lot of email and message traffic back and forth between the two of them, and that was Hillary's defense. You want to go there? I mean, you're going to expose the president, and then we're going to guarantee a Republican in 2016. Is probably the calculus that was going on in 2015-16. Why the intelligence community guy decided to aggressively pursue what he pursued, that led to a referral to the FBI on July 6, 2015, and an opening of the FBI investigation on July 10th, 2015. Why he would have done that when today he seems to be somewhat squirrely is difficult to understand. But there's no question that we will never get to the bottom of what happened in 2015 and 2016 if we don't follow down this trail of email traffic in great depth, and also understanding what Hillary and Bill and the Clinton Foundation was doing with its email operation, and back as far as the Clinton presidency. How did these people use email? Remember that Ira Magaziner, who is one of the prime movers, in my view, in this illegal, corrupt mess known as the Clinton Foundation, was Bill Clinton's internet czar. After he screwed up healthcare for Hillary Clinton's task force, he was brought back in to focus on designing an internet strategy for the United States of America in the last period of Bill Clinton's second term. So you're talking about somebody who was very internet savvy, in theory, Ira Magaziner, working with the Clintons, a close pal of Bill going all the way back to Oxford in 1970, I guess. And, to suggest that Bill Clinton doesn't use email, doesn't use text, I'm not buying any of that.
I think you're right.
I think as a likelihood, just given his fertile, let us say his fertile mind, and given what's out there in the internet for people who might get in trouble Lewinsky style, I just don't believe that. In fact, I'll tell you a vignette. I don't know if I've told our viewers this. I may have mentioned it, that one time after he was president, so it would have been maybe 2001 or thereabouts, maybe 2002. I know exactly when it was now, I can remember. It was in July of 2001, I believe. I was at LaGuardia Airport, headed out to Columbus to go to a board meeting in rural Ohio rather, and they are different. And I was sitting there having my coffee and a bagel or something like that in the snack area, and I could see the newsstand, and I could see Bill Clinton, wave off his security detail, and then go into the newsstand.
Wait a minute, at LaGuardia, Bill Clinton?
2001, after he's no longer president, right? And sure, and I'm sitting, it's like in the morning.
Hustler.
Exactly. Don't tell me that a guy, former president of the United States, who would, in an unguarded moment, he thought, start poking around the adult magazine section at a public place. Don't tell me that he wouldn't be using the internet. I just don't believe that one.
Right. He's searching for something on there.
Right. So then this is, Jason, we covered this very briefly before the show. You skipped the one we want to talk about, the Daily Beast one. This is really something. This I was trying to find a story which I actually didn't find. And maybe some of our viewers will find it and send it to us, post it up there. There was a text interchange that was revealed by Fox News and others this last week. I think it was around June 25th, 2016, text interchange between two Justice or FBI people saying, what do you want us to do? We have all the Obama-Clinton emails. What should we do with them? Now, June 25th, 2016 is 2 days before the Tarmac meeting in Phoenix. And we've been over this timeline many, many times, but here's confirmation in a piece in the Daily Beast, which I wouldn't believe it if I didn't know it already to be true, but here's something in the Daily Beast, September 23rd, 2016, and it's by the writer Shane Harris.
Yep.
Updated April 13th, 2017, when Peter Smith was still alive.
At 3:03.
At 3:03. April 13th, 2017. Here's Shane Harris, who is, I would argue, intimately involved. He leaves the Beast to go, where was it? First to the Journal and then to the Post or something.
Yeah.
And he, in the interim, gets involved with Matt Tate. We've been down the whole long timeline here.
Oh, I meant to ask our GCHQ guy about Matt Tate. I forgot.
You can do
I'll
that.
email him.
Or maybe have a different follow-on show.
Yeah.
But here's confirmation that definitely they knew about these emails. And when we think about the Clinton Foundation, I know, because we have now gotten email traffic from multiple sources around the world, that there are missing emails. And there had to have been missing emails, particularly in the period when Hillary Clinton was inveigling to become running for president the first time, and then inveigling to be Secretary of State. The Clinton Foundation was in dire distress. It had taken hundreds of millions of dollars from governments, and that money had disappeared, and nobody wanted the public to know where it had ended up. And so don't tell me that when she became Secretary of State, governments weren't contacting the State Department and the President and whatever, say, look, this Clinton Foundation's got some issues and we want some of our money back, or, we want a bigger share of the money you guys are stealing. I mean, there have to be a lot more incriminating emails than the ones that we found.
Yeah.
And the fact that they would admit that they knew about Clinton-Obama emails, and then this fellow, Shane Harris, would have this thing published, so he knew they knew.
Yeah.
Right? And then he ends up centrally in the messing about involving Peter Smith and other matters. I think the FBI, which spent a lot of time, you think about it, George Papadopoulos makes the mistake of going to the wrong wine bar in the UK, and he ends up, serving, 2 weeks in prison or something for lying to the FBI. And on the other hand, here you have this lawfare group, Shane Harris, Matt Tate, Ben Wittes, and a few other people, right in so many messes, and nobody is saying, dudes, okay,
what do you guys know about this?
Yeah.
Actually, someone's been saying that, Charles. I don't know if people recall my phone call with Shane Harris, but like so many people who I call up who don't want to answer for their obvious lies, he just hung up the phone. Mm-hmm. And there's been a Twitter exchange today with Ben Wittes of the Lawfare blog, where I have alleged that Mr. Wittes knows quite a bit more about the death of Peter Smith than he's told us, and he right away tweeted it at, without me prompting him, Shane Harris and Matt Tate. It's kind of interesting, isn't it?
Yeah, especially Matt Tate.
It seems like evidence of collusion.
Yeah, that's right. Well, we'll get our best man on that. Mueller knows about collusion, right?
I think so.
Let's get him on that.
What he has to say about that. But these are some slippery characters there, Charles. I wonder if we'll ever find out exactly what they know about this.
I don't know. So then we have, this piece here. This is a piece.
Medium?
Yeah, a writer, she used to be at, Laura Rosen used to be a pretty senior person, I forget where, and remember about a year ago when the FBI came knocking on my door in early December, this article preceded the contact that I got from the FBI early in December. I remember it vividly. At this point, Corsi was being aggressively hounded by Mueller and the FBI. And she sought me out, as did virtually every major corporate-owned media elite, from the New York Times, Washington Post, CNN, you name it. They all contacted me all at once.
And they were like, Charles, hi, it's Chelsea, Shelby, whatever her name is. Have you been visited by the FBI yet?
Not yet? Okay, give me another hour.
She also defended Shane Harris when we spoke with her. I got some issues with her if she'd like to call, but I don't think she will.
No. But the point here is that we contrast the mega effort of Robert Mueller to go in search of Russian collusion and end up with Paul Manafort's peccadillos haberdashery bill and landscaping decisions. When Mueller never, as far as I know, Mueller's team never actually determined or gave the public a chance to understand why Comey didn't aggressively seek to understand what happened with the DNC server at the time it happened. Why didn't he do any of that? Where's the proof, the proof that we can think about and we can debate that there was actually a hack and that it wasn't a leak? Where's the exhaustive analysis? Who do we bring in? What independent group do we bring in? Anyway, this is a long thing that covers a lot of old ground, but I put it up there in this page just to remind people that there has to be a reckoning. The heart of this scandal is precisely where Obama and Clinton and Bush people don't want you to go. It's into the corrupt use of charities dating back more than 20 years, involving Republicans and Democrats. And we are now going to show you how we can get right to the bottom of it in a few minutes.
The only hack the FBI has been able to find is Robert Mueller himself.
Well, and Comey.
And Comey. And McCabe. Right. And everybody else we've seen from the FBI so far.
Right. But this Epoch Times has got a piece here. Oh, wait. Yeah. Sorry. We want to talk quickly about Larry Johnson once again. Now, the next one. Larry Johnson has he's a retired CIA person. He's a prolific writer. I don't know how he gets this stuff out as quickly and as exhaustively as he does. But here he's putting all the pieces together, and I'm beginning to read his stuff more carefully and more frequently. And I suggest people think about it.
What does this mean, Sic Semper Tyrannis? Why do these ex-CIA guys always use Latin names for their websites? Are they communicating with somebody in some way?
I don't know.
Okay.
I am not my Larry Johnson's keeper. But what I would say, though, this is a piece where he fleshes out the degree to which Brennan had put in place, most likely, a much more aggressive and a much more robustly staffed and financed group to go after Trump. And I actually think it's more likely it wasn't simply going after Trump. In the same way, intelligence agencies around the world think about countries that have looming elections and try to scenario plan, what happens in Taiwan if the election goes this way or that way? What happens in France or Germany or whatever? There's no doubt that the CIA would think that through, even if they're not supposed to do it, inside this country, right? They would be wanting to think through it, because if, for example, this country were to go very far to the left, like really far to the left.
Hasn't it already?
I mean, I'm talking like totalitarian takeover, communist style. I would have thought ordinarily in the 50s, the CIA would have cared about that, right? But
now they're doing
it. Now they're like, that's our plan.
Yeah, exactly. Very bizarre, Charles.
But very good piece by Larry. Epoch Times here talking about a more hopeful piece that actually criminal indictments are finally en route. And at the gathering I went to last week, where Bannon spoke, he was praising the Epoch Times. I've actually been in touch with a few of the journalists there. Some of them do extremely good work. This is I think, not a journalistic piece, but an opinion piece, suggesting that at long last, we're going to see real criminal indictments coming.
This
we can
woman
only
has
hope.
an excellent voice and very good acoustics wherever they're recording her.
This woman?
Yeah, she's usually on when I watch Epoch Times.
So
yeah,
that I've
there's
never
her.
watched them. I've just read. They have a video.
This woman is like on YouTube, I see her reading the news for Epoch
Oh,
Times.
okay, good.
Yeah.
Good one.
And then here's Horowitz.
There he is.
What's he been up
Let's
to?
hope he doesn't turn out to be Horriblewitz.
Yeah. Well, let's just hope he does anything. I mean, we haven't heard much from him at all, have we?
So you could pull up the link, but it's going to go to two YouTubes. The first is really actually hysterical. The first is an interview that Donald Trump gave in 1999 when he was flirting with running for president with Jay Leno, and it's very funny. December 7th. I wonder if you picked that date on purpose. But we obviously are not going to put this whole clip up or even a short piece of it, but for people who are looking for comic relief and also interested to see how Donald Trump behaved 20 years ago, it's actually quite a fun video to watch. And in contrast, I remember watching this at the time, but I kind of forgot about it. This second, longer YouTube, there's this dinner here in New York called the Al Smith Dinner, which is, I think it's the Al Smith Dinner, which is really a great, the Al Smith Charity Dinner. And this I think it came out, it says here October 20th, 2016. And the way it worked is the second debate where they had Kathleen Willey and Juanita Broderick. That was the day before, this dinner. And this thing, it's way too long to look at now, but this really it starts out pretty funny, and then Donald Trump drops the nuclear bombs on Hillary Clinton, and not many people are laughing. I mean, he does it more than once in a New York City crowd, when here she is, in theory, the darling of New York City and so well connected in New York City. And when we go back through the timeline, remember that the Abedin laptop revelations came public October 27th. And so from October 20th, it looked like Hillary Clinton might win, right? And then things changed a lot. Comey came out and said, we're reopening the investigation. Ultimately, Donald Trump does win. So to go back into that history, I really commend to our viewership, if you have the time, watch that roast, because it's probably 25, 30 minutes of brutality, but actually pretty well done. So our friend, on two lighter notes, or two different notes, Gordon Chang has this out today, or the Zero Hedge had it out last night, where Gordon is a friend of mine, and I've actually been on John Batchelor's show with him since 2009. And so I feel I know him pretty well. I'm privileged to know him. He is an incisive, deep thinker. He probably regrets his legal training, but he's also a well-trained lawyer. He wrote a book predicting China's downfall long ago. He's not persona non grata in China, but he's certainly not the first person they think, on whatever the communist equivalent of Christmas is. But here's Gordon raising, kicking it up a notch, Emerald style, saying that actually we shouldn't be trying to get any kind of a trade deal. We're talking here about the Third Reich. I mean, we're talking about the people inside the Chinese government, according to Gordon, are people. It's a small cadre. Not many people understand that the membership in the Communist Party is roughly 150 million people, and the total population is roughly 1.4 billion in theory.
Wow.
So Bannon had this refrain last week. Here's Gordon stepping it up a lot actually, saying, on the one hand, why are we trying to cozy up to China when, and this is really the right thing to do, and what a political opening, Gordon hasn't yet gone here, what a political opening for Donald Trump. People decry Donald Trump as the person who's anti-Islam. It's not Donald Trump who's rounding people up in concentration camps who happen to be Islamic in China. Donald Trump's not doing that. Donald Trump, as far as I know, is not involved in organ harvesting.
I thought AOC said something else.
But the point is, for Donald Trump could pivot very easily and call up his good buddy MBS in Saudi Arabia saying, you know, you're trying to get this Aramco deal done where you might need the help of the largest capital market in the world. What the hell are you thinking, cozying up with China, when you have, as you know, the keeper of Mecca and Medina, you've got millions of Muslims inside China who are being kept in concentration camps. How can you look at us in Saudi Arabia and China as, you know, anything to a close call? You should absolutely be in our camp. You need to join with us.
But aren't they?
I don't know.
I don't think Saudi Arabia does anything on the level. I think that they're just interested in...
Well, but across the Islamic world, I mean, what a thing to say. You know, as you confront your future, any country that's prepared to do 5, 10, 15, 20-year planning, okay, today China is weak economically, in my view. They have too much debt. There's been a lot of wasted spending. There's a lot of corruption. It is a challenge to try to run a dictatorship with only 150 million people.
It's a grind, Charles.
No, but I'm just saying, it's
day
not...
to day.
It's
it looks easy, but trust me.
Right. You know, it's not the smartest place in the world for China to be right now. And here's Gordon very courageously. He's got family still living in China. I mean, he's a great person. And I believe he's headed over to Europe to give some speeches and talk more about his views, the threats posed by Huawei, the threats posed by China generally, and the opportunities that he sees out there for the United States.
You know, Charles, President Xi, he just makes it look easy oppressing 1 billion people. You know, it's not something everybody could do.
A snappy dresser, the Xi.
Yes, exactly. You know,
yeah. But then we have this one. I mean, it comes a point. I mean, I've joked about it in the past, and I do it for a very good reason. I like to walk when you can walk in the weather around here, and I tend to get up in the morning and then like to have a cup of coffee or two at a local place. Jason will never go there with me because he doesn't like the fantastic McDonald's coffee.
Yeah, I don't ever drink coffee, but I hate McDonald's.
Nor does Trump.
Doesn't drink coffee. It gives me heartburn.
Yeah, well, got to put cream in it. But anyway, so the collection of characters one runs into walking the streets of New York or sitting in one of these McDonald's restaurants, I would say if you took 100 of the randomest, you know, bums hanging out in these places and asked them their views on what to do next with America,
you'd have the Trevor Noah show.
Yeah, but 99 of them would talk more sense than Hillary Clinton is talking.
Oh, yeah.
You know, and who could possibly have advised somebody who may want to swoop in and rig the 2019-2020 election to go on this silly show? I mean, it's an interesting comedic show. I mean, what you going to do next? Go into that milk tub-filled bathtub with the Fruit Loops and talk to that lady?
Yes.
I mean, it's just...
Wait, 50 Cent with Nancy Pelosi? Too bad it's not the old 50 Cent, because he could have popped a cap in her. I don't know.
Well, 50 Cent went bankrupt, didn't he?
I don't think so. He made like $1 billion buying vitamin water or something like that.
No, he had some problems with bankruptcy first.
I haven't followed 50 Cent. 50 Cent, excuse me.
Yeah. You know, actually, of all places, Fiddy was living. My daughter went to the school in Farmington, Connecticut called Miss Porter's, and that's actually where Fiddy was hanging out. And it's the most implausible juxtaposition. And this Miss Porter's school, they call it Farmington for short, is a place where Barbara Bush went there, Jackie Onassis went there, and lots of billionaire-type, well-positioned leaders around the world send their daughters there. And it's a very quaint Connecticut town in the middle of nowhere, really, near Hartford, but not that close to it. And to imagine Fiddy hanging out with the girls, it's unusual.
But back to Trevor Noah for a second. What did Hillary Clinton say when he asked her?
She cackled. She just laughed.
So, Charles, is this a matter of, you know, somebody like me or Laura Loomer or whatever asks Hillary Clinton this question when she's not prepared for it, and she's like, and that goes viral. But if someone like Trevor Noah, who kind of all the time is, you know, Democrat nonsense, he asks her this because she's ready for the question. They have a way to answer it that makes it, it's all a big laugh. That's conspiracy nonsense.
Well, I mean, one of the things I like about our interchange in this show is that it's naturally. I don't go and say, Jason, I'm going to ask you the following questions.
Right.
Better get ready. Nor do you do the same with me.
Right.
It's just nor do we do it with the UK people, really.
Right.
So, or any of our guests. So, in the case of the Clintons, my understanding is they do not do media without an understanding up front about what's going to happen
Right.
in the media setting. It's not that, which is why you see Hillary on Fox never. Although maybe she'll now come on because Fox has gone into the henhouse.
Well, I don't know. I don't find Trevor Noah that funny, and I think he is usually pandering to the left.
Good. So I promised that we would be raising the temperature on a episode by episode basis. We've unbeknownst, I think, to the Clinton team and the Clinton loyalists and the people who think that this is just a big joke and that they've gotten away with fraud forever, so they're going to get away for fraud into the future forever. By doing now 185 two-hour podcasts that are out there in the public domain, that millions of different views have occurred over the course of a chronology, it will become very difficult for experts in the field of nonprofit accounting and law to say, we didn't know there was a problem with the Clinton Foundation. I mean, there are some now who are saying that, and it is tooting my own horn a little bit, that one of the main reasons Hillary may have lost in 2016, beyond pissing off so many people, is that when people thought about the dissonance, the contrast between her claims on all the good works the Clinton Foundation had done, and then all the noise real noise and screams suggesting that in Haiti and elsewhere the Clintons had been up to no good, and that it wasn't a minor little problem. It wasn't $100,000 here or there. This was billions of dollars being diverted, and you were about to let the person in the middle of that scam be the most powerful person on earth. That contrast may have been one of the deciding factors that caused people to stay home if they were Democrat, or to come out and vote against her if they were on the fence. And so in the course of that work, this is a slightly different field, and I'm not going to get too much into numbers, which I know gets people upset when I do that.
You always say that, but I don't think it's right. People don't mind.
Oh, okay. Well, so when you bring in an accounting firm to check your books and records, and you do so in a foundation, the accounting firm needs to take that work very seriously. And accounting firms, the global economy now has gotten so big that accounting firms are working for not-for-profits and making money off that. They're working for government grantors, governments, and making money off that. And they also work for individuals and companies. So it's not like the only thing they want to do is work for IBM or Exxon or GE. They're very happy to develop a not-for-profit practice.
But just a quick point of clarification, would you consider doing an audit in a tiger suit to be serious?
No.
Oh, yeah.
Nor do I consider at this point BKD,
Right.
let's say it's not-for-profit practice, to be in any way serious.
Right.
So what happens typically is if it's a contested matter, I mean, if there's a lot of controversy around something, you try to find an accounting firm to come in, and that's what happened when DLA Piper, during 2015, the law firm, wanted to get an accounting firm to take a look at the Clinton Foundation because there was so much noise about it. So rather than having the Clinton Foundation hire this Cohn-Resnick directly, they went first and hired DLA Piper, a law firm. So in theory, they believed they could interpose the attorney-client privilege that the accounting firm was working for DLA Piper. And when you try to find out what it was that Cohn-Resnick was actually doing, DLA Piper would say, well, no, I can't, I can't give you that information. I don't have to give you that information.
Huh.
And so I noticed,
brother, right?
I don't think it's right when you get to, I think Michael Cohen discovered just how wrong that is. And Michael Cohen was a provider of legal services to Donald Trump, who's currently in prison. And so what happens when you are a lawyer, a bad lawyer, and you get all in for a game that you thought you were going to win? Remember, the Clintons love this game of, I think it's called Oh Shit or Oh Hell or something like that. but it's like hearts. It's a game where you've got 52 cards, you got 13 in each suit. You don't want to end up with a heart, okay? Because if you do in hearts, if you do, it's one negative point against you. On the other hand, it's like, and the way in which you play, it's a 4-person game of war. You know, the card game where you throw down a card and I throw down a card and the high card wins. So this is now 4 people doing that in teams of 2. Sometimes we're not in teams of 2, and other ways you could play. But anyway, and ordinarily you don't want to get hearts. On the other hand, if you're a genius, you know, in cards, you can try to get all the bad cards, all the hearts, in which case you get this mega bonus, you win the lottery in points. So I think what was going on in 15 and 16 is that the script had been played out for a while. The Clintons had been covering up this fraud since October 23rd, 1997, if not earlier. And they found themselves in a place in 2015-16, the Obamas and the Clintons, where they really needed to stop any inquiry into this Clinton Foundation. And I'm not saying this just because you and I have been focused on it, but it's the heart of the matter. The fraud was all booked and transacted through the Clinton Foundation, around the Clinton Foundation, around allied charities. They could not have this investigation blow up right before the election, because then for certain, it wouldn't have been, you know, this close blue wall thing. Hillary Clinton would have been
disqualified.
She would have been in Gitmo. Yeah. I'm joking, but I mean, she would have been way out of there well before November had the Clinton Foundation investigation run its proper course. And Andrew Napolitano, I'd forgotten about this until recently, he had a story in January of 2016 claiming that 100 FBI agents were working on the Clinton Foundation investigation. If 100 FBI people were working on that investigation, I want to see the notes.
Yeah.
I mean, because you know, what were they doing? They're sitting there saying, let's get 10 of you over here. Well, you guys look at the Penthouse. You guys look at the Playboy. You guys, for good measure, you look at, you know, go through the Grindr applications or whatever. But I mean, what were they doing? You know, because they should have been able to bring this home a lot sooner.
How do we know that Judge Knapp was accurate in saying that?
Because I'd heard other reports. Other people were saying that it was a massive, massive exercise. I had one person tell me that, and I won't say who, but a credible person tell me that they were convinced that to prosecute, that they knew enough in the summer of 2015, they knew enough that to move this thing forward the way it needed to go would require, you know, half of the active investigative staff and prosecutorial staff at the federal level. It's such, well, because this Clinton Foundation, when you pull on the string, it's, you know, 50 countries they were operating in, 80 countries, 100 countries they were operating in. It's, you know, 10, 20 donor countries. It's how many different foundations, how many different individuals were claiming that they had made donations to a public charity to get a 50% against their income deduction when it wasn't a public charity and they shouldn't have got. I mean, to really prosecute all of the actors, the donors, the recipients, the executives, the trustees. I mean, it really is a massive job, which is why we've done 185 podcasts on it.
But you see, you raised something earlier that's very important that I think I want to bring people's attention back to, which was this notion that they wouldn't prosecute Hillary Clinton because they knew it would lead to Barack Obama, and the logistics of bringing that kind of legal case just seemed untenable, you know, going against really the office of the President of the United States, whoever it is. That type of criminal prosecution is unprecedented, and a lot of people probably felt it wouldn't be able to go through. So I don't think that people have necessarily fully embraced the understanding that lawyers, people who have been lawyers for 40 years, are thinking constantly on such a level of not just is this legal or illegal, but how far can I push this and reasonably expect that no one's going to prosecute this no matter how illegal it is. And I think we're seeing the Clintons and all of these connections that you've teased out over the 2, 3, 4 years, they're pushing the boundaries of that beyond anything we've ever seen.
Well, yeah, I think that you've raised a good point. I mean, I think the way the folks in D.C. look at it is they know that a D.C. jury is going to lean Democratic. They know that.
But they're not even going to find a prosecutor. That's what Comey meant when he said no sensible prosecutor. Not that there's not a case here, just the logistics, the politics are so thorny that no one's going to take this on.
Yeah, and then the double standard is that in the case of Donald Trump, what we're going to do is we're going to find no competent prosecutor
exactly.
to waste a tremendous amount of time on this. And when the Russian hoax doesn't come through, then we get a totally, I mean, the guy looks like Captain kangaroo a little bit, doesn't he?
Who's
Shifty
that?
Adam Schiff.
Oh,
a little
yeah.
bit.
I don't
a little
know.
bit.
I don't know.
But anyway, I put this up here to say that this Cohn-Resnick firm, these are excerpts from the website with links. This is here they talk about Cohn-Resnick's not-for-profit. Cohn-Resnick is a not-for-profit tax expert. Okay, this is from their firm. Okay, we help you. We're experts. I sent an email, and we're now going to show. I'm going to show you for the first time the email portions of the email that I sent. Some have been edited. I sent it in a rush, and there were some typos. I put in some information that I don't want out in the public, my personal telephone number, stuff like that. But but before we get there, the person I sent it to is John Alfonso, who then was the leader of the firm's not-for-profit and education industry practice. Okay, of course, the email that you're about to see, I got no response. But I sent this email in March of 2016.
To John Alfonso.
To John Alfonso
Cohn-Resnick.
himself. 24th of March. Okay, now this is significant to the accountants who are listening to this, and the lawyers and the government authorities. This is significant because I made the head of the not-for-profit practice of Cohn-Resnick aware of many specific, detailed concerns I had about illegal activities seen through the Clinton Foundation filings of the various Clinton entities in specific detail. So they knew that somebody, they could say, well, maybe I'm a crackpot. I'm so silly on this stuff that I didn't see any problems at GE. Oh, wait, I did see that before other people saw it. So, if you look at this email, and maybe it didn't go to him, maybe it went to his spam folder, maybe he was too busy.
Yeah.
Right. But, I mean, it's an unrecognized email address, so it's possible it went to his spam folder. But I wanted this out there in the public record now, before November 15th, 2019, because Cohn-Resnick did this work, and I unsuccessfully tried to warn them back 3.5 years ago, that there were big problems in the Clinton Foundation that I saw. They did inaccurate work, in my view, for the Clinton Foundation prior to November 16th, 2015, when on the strength of their work, the Clinton Foundation put out this ridiculous letter. We might put it up here, from Donna Shalala Land. This is a letter that appeared.
Dear friends.
From Donna Shalala. Now, she was working in New York. There is no such entity called the Clinton Foundation in New York. And you go down this page a little bit, there's all this happy horse shit, and it says, we found some errors.
Oops.
Our accountant said we don't have to refile. And then if you go to the next page.
Our accountant's a tiger.
Yeah. So here it is. We undertook a review. This lady, Kathy Keneally, did some work for us. She used to be in the tax department at the U.S. Department of Justice, so obviously she is perfectly prepared to overlook any criminal behavior of Democrats. So we hired her for that reason. She doesn't actually say that, but
right.
You keep on going through this, and praising this and praising that. And then there's another there's another quote fact sheet, which we don't have to put up. People have seen it before. But the fact sheet says, in categorical terms, it says, these remarks, it's actual language from the fact sheet, these remarks can be attributed to Kathy Keneally, is the way Kathy Keneally's view is expressed in a fact sheet. Now, in my experience with lawyers, they will never, in a bazillion years, will a responsible law firm allow a client to put something out in print that says, these remarks of the individual working for DLA Piper can be attributed. Well, anything can be attributed to Kathy Keneally. It could be attributed to her that she might be someday the head of, I don't know, Avon, the Avon Drug Company. It doesn't matter, or some cannabis.
Well, they can be attributed to her, but she could deny it.
Right. It's just not the way it would work. You would get
it's a lawyer way of saying, I'm putting this here, but I didn't actually say this.
It's a bad client way of mischaracterizing what DLA Piper likely said. So DLA Piper would, if they're going to say something at all, they're going to say it to a client that they want published with their name attached to it. They're going to say it in writing.
Right.
so that you
reproduce exactly.
Here's
this.
what we said, and they're not going to say. They're not in the business generally, these high-power law firms, of letting clients characterize in a contested situation that's the center of a gigantic political campaign. These remarks can be attributed to Kathy Conneal. Bullshit. That is just not what really happened. And again, in this whole area of are the accounting firms, are the law firms, and together with the Clinton Foundation conspiring to commit the largest set of charity frauds in the world, and then to cover that up, because that wouldn't do much for the business of the law firms, the accounting firms, the Clinton Foundation, the trustees of the Clinton Foundation, the donors, the government. Is that really what's happening here? And I think it is. So I sent this email, and I noted to them in the beginning, because I was trying to think through how a big firm like this could make the kind of mistake that they, in my view, did make. And my guess was that the Clintons said, all right, look, here's what you're going to study. Prior to January 1st, 2010, when we have attempted under the tutelage and direction, perhaps, of Barack Obama and Valerie Jarrett to clean up this mess, okay, and because maybe we can assert there's a 5-year window on statute of limitations for tax, maybe, we're going to ask you to do your review from January 1st, 2010 forward, ignoring all the history, which is so damaging, because if you did that, if you don't ignore the history, you're going to have to conclude we broke the law. That's what I suspect. That's the kind of trick the Clintons have pulled in history, and other crooks have pulled in history. Don't look at the real crime.
Right.
We want you just to focus on the fiction, which we will argue is all correct. So I make the point. In real life, and I've talked to many great accountants about this, and I knew this anyway. There's no way that a serious firm, accounting firm, would do this kind of work and say, oh yeah, we're not going to look at the root causes of the problem. Of course you have to go all the way back to the beginning, because that's what the IRS does. You've got to go back to October 23rd, 1997, and you've got to ask yourself, was this thing validly organized? And the answer is, no, it wasn't.
I think I need to make some new images, perhaps, of the tiger holding signs like, this is a serious accounting firm.
So the real question is, having done this horrible work, or found themselves in a position where they'd done horrible work for the Clinton Foundation in the middle of a political campaign, how in the hell could Cohn-Resnick make a decision to then become the independent accountant for the Clinton Foundation with regard to 2016, 17, and maybe 18 work? How did they go through that drill? When you are thinking about any client as an accountant, the first thing you generally do, if you want to be a licensed CPA, is you ask, is this something I can audit? Is this, I'm the head of the not-for-profit organization at a firm that claims to be an expert in not-for-profit matters. The first question that I would be asking as the auditor is the Clinton Foundation actually a charity? Where's the proof that this Bill, Hillary, and Chelsea Clinton Foundation ever was organized lawfully or operated lawfully at any point anywhere in the world? Show me that proof, and then I'll consider whether I want my not-for-profit firm or section of my accounting firm to actually attempt an audit. And as a guest, that's not what they were thinking. They were thinking, you know what? This Clinton Global Initiative, that's going to go on steroids. We do this work. We do the Clintons, another solid. We do this thing together. We'll get involved with the Clinton Global Initiative. We'll get involved with all these Clinton people who are trying to do deals around, grifting deals around the world. Think of all the accounting work we can do for this. Let's a technicality that this Clinton Foundation is a sham. It should have been wound up a long time. That's just a technicality. Think of all the new business, guys. You're not thinking. I could just imagine the debate. I've been in debates like that with crooks. So a very big set of questions. How in the hell did the folks, who was supervising the work that Cohn-Resnick did through November 16, 2015, and what did the other partners of Cohn-Resnick who would like to still work for an intact firm, what stress testing did they do of the folks who argued that Cohn-Resnick should turn around and audit this Clinton Foundation? And who is leading that team in 2019 as we speak? Because they've got an audit. They've got 10 business days left to finish this audit. Next Friday, not this coming Friday, but the following Friday is the 15th. They got 10 business days. That's not a lot of time to check all this work and check all these files. If they render an audit, it's going to go into the public domain, and their situation is going to be a lot worse than it would be if they resign the assignment or attempt to limit their downside other ways. But Lord help them if they render an audit.
But that's Cohn-Resnick, not.
Well, we'll get to that, Jason. We're going to go, but we're not done.
Sorry, I didn't think we were done. I was just going to.
Okay, so just to make it clear, I don't want to go into all the details now because we're already over time a little bit, but I laid out in this email, this is the first page of the email, I laid out, and we could just now scroll to the next page, a series of specific questions of how is the reorganization structured in crystal clear terms for this supposed head of the not-for-profit organization, Cohn-Resnick, to wrap his mind around. And as a guest, he said, you know what, I'm not going to F that, I'm not going to look at this. I mean, I'm going to wait and see who wins. And then maybe, we'll see what happens afterwards. But a whole bunch of stuff, people who've been watching this show know that we've done show after show on the details of each of these topics. This guy was aware of it. So why did Cohn-Resnick elect by November 16, 2015, why did they rely on the shoddy work product of Price Waterhouse? Why did Cohn-Resnick and Price Waterhouse rely on the shoddy work product of BKD? And when are the government authorities at state level, at federal level, at foreign level, when are they going to do something to send a clear shot across the bow of the accounting community? You cannot lend a supposed good name to a piece of garbage, corrupt slush fund, the Clinton opportunistic slush fund hiding in plain sight foundation. You cannot attempt to audit and allow your firm's name to still be associated with all the audits that are out there. BKD has years of bullshit audits that have been circulating across state lines, have been sent using the mail, relied upon by donors all over the world. Same with Price Waterhouse, same with Cohn-Resnick. Those documents must be rescinded. And the AICPA, the body that sits on top of the accounting profession, and other bodies that sit on top, have got to make examples of the people who would, on the one hand, swear what they had to swear to become a CPA, on the other hand, for filthy lucre and the chance to get close to a bunch of grifters who might have been President of the United States and in the power position where they hoped to be. For all that, they betrayed the accounting profession. They betrayed those who hold the practice and proper operation of nonprofits to be important. They betrayed all those people. And they must be called to account. So we go to the next page, Jason. I kept going with questions. These are accountants will know, these are the kind of questions you don't want somebody like me asking. I'm basically saying, when you cut right down to it, I laid out, this is just portions of the email. I left out some details, other ones. But back March 24th, 2016, when Bernie Sanders could have been the Democratic nominee, okay, this guy at Cohn-Resnick, if he got the email, said, you know what? Just forget this. Let's bury this. Let's see who wins. And then magically, presto changeo, Cohn-Resnick gets to produce the 2016 audit in 2017, the 2017 audit in 2018, and maybe, and I hope they're not, but maybe they're working right now feverishly on the 2018 audit, which is due in the public's hands not later than the 15th of November 2019, 10 business days from now. So why is this a problem? Let's go into some final details on the next slide, and I'll be very quick on this. Accounting firms are highly regulated, actually. The accounting profession is highly regulated around the world. And what they do is they sit and have these pronouncements. This particular pronouncement was considered originally and effective in 1989. They actually would get the accountants together and say, what do we do if we encounter a client that's engaged in illegal activities? Let's think through what these are just some of the sections. They're like, there's, I think, 19 or 20 sections in this, the paragraphs in this. But they define what illegal acts are, violations of laws or government regulations, right? I mean,
I mean,
well, you have to, but that's just the way they go. They take you through it, okay? And here you say, I mean, these guys, the head of the firm claims they're experts in not-for-profit on their website right now, around the world. Everyone looking at cone resonant sites can say, yeah, we're experts in this. The section says, okay, that illegal acts are things that your firm will recognize are being illegal. Now, you can't say that you're an expert in not-for-profit
if you don't
charity
even
work
know what's
if you don't
illegal.
even know what the hell one is. I mean, because I mean, technically, the Clinton Foundation is not like the Gates Foundation. It's a public charity that may not be dominated by a family or its creator. This thing has been dominated by Bill Clinton and Hillary Clinton since before its birth. They selected the site using a group of allies who were trying to redevelop Little Rock when it was, like old Soho or a bombed out portion of New York. They had a lot of time to think through which pieces of Little Rock should we best site this foundation and who might benefit from snapping up land that ultimately would become a lot more valuable once the foundation went. And do they have any experience with crooked land deals?
Yeah. Instead of draining the swamp, they're building a presidential library in the swamp.
Exactly. So they've got a bunch of people who should have been able to recognize whether or not illegal activities had happened in a not-for-profit, because this was plainly a for-profit criminal conspiracy. Hillary and Bill, writ large, and Chelsea, had nothing. They had negative net worth when Bill left the White House. They had the promise of book deals, they had the promise of this and the promise of that, but as a technical legal matter, their debts were greater than their assets. So they're bankrupt.
Right.
They just didn't crystallize it. And they then decide to make a fortune in the not-for-profit industry. I mean, it's just, you're not allowed to do that. But because numbskulls will sit there, and Hillary was so effective when she deflected attention on Jennifer Flowers, saying, my husband has been the victim of a vast left-wing conspiracy. I mean, what did you want me to do? Stay home and bake cookies? And people bought that. That's exactly what she said. And people said, she's got a point.
Yeah. Her cooking probably sucks.
That's right. So there are specific sections, and people who are more conversant with accounting rules, more conversant with the public filings of the Clinton Foundation, should be readying themselves to file complaints against Cone Resnick for the work they've already done. And through November 16, 2015, for their, I would say, in quotes, audit done in 2017 for 16, for the in quotes audit done in 18 for 17. And they need to face intense scrutiny, Cone Resnick does, as does Pricewaterhouse, as does BKD. And we're driving this process towards November 15th, 2009. I always think that things should happen more quickly than they do happen, but let's see what happens. I mean, somebody wrote a book about that, right? What happened?
Yeah.
It's right over here.
Exactly. What may happen.
What mayhem happened.
All right.
So with that, Jason, we've gone a little bit over time, but
there we go, Charles. I think people were very intrigued by our UK panel, including myself. I have a lot more questions for those guys. And based on the comments, people want to see them back. So we'll be doing that in the future. Charles, thanks for, we're speaking about the future with a Terminator theme. So
there you go.
Perhaps we need to transport you through time to do that.
Time hacking.
Yeah.
Time phone hacking.
Charles, we've had a wonderful audience today. I want to remind everybody who's watching us that these shows can't come to you without your support, the viewers' support. Even though Sunday with Charles is free on YouTube for everybody to watch, tremendous amount of time goes into preparing this, arranging with the guests, coordinating with you, creating the artwork, putting it here, having all this equipment. And Charles, I had hoped to surprise you. What happens if you sit a little more? See, what I have brought in today is a new software feature that is allowing us to present you in what is technically higher resolution, but by my perception looks worse than usual.
Is it scaring people?
No, I mean, what happens is normally I'm creating this close-up shot of you by using a digital magnification process, and a new version of the software has allowed me to use the optical telephoto lens for the first time, but it's actually just allowing us to more clearly see the chromatic aberrations and shortcomings of that lens. So what I had hoped to be an exciting technological surprise turns out to basically be a flop. So that's totally appropriate for our Terminator Dark Fate themed episode today. And I want to thank you for participating and for inviting those great guests. I want to thank everybody for watching, and have a great evening.
Thank you, Jason.
Take care.